over this month of September, we are spending time dealing with the DNA of our church. What we stand for, how we stand for it. The reality is that every organization, every clustering of human beings ought to have a DNA. Some organizations, it just sort of happens along the way. But I believe if you're going to do God's work, you ought to have an intention. You ought to have a goal and a direction. If you don't, you end up doing every little thing and every little activity, and you lose sight of what God would have you do. In 2015-16, I brought forward to our congregation a simple thing: reach, care, grow. Reach our community, care for people, and grow in Christ. Can you all say it with me? Reach, care, grow. Those are the simple matrices that we run our decision-making processes through. I was so proud of my steward board the other night. I didn't have to even say it to them. We were going through it, and then they said, how does that look from the angle of caring? I almost jumped up and ran around the house, Sister Josie, because as a leader, when somebody parrots something back to you and it has context and stuff, you're like, I've been preaching for years, and it finally rubbed off. But it was amazing to listen to them tackle and all have a heart for caring. And that was phenomenal to me. But I believe the church is entering into a different paradigm. Sadly to say, when I preached and laid this out in 2016, because we live in such a transitory area, 90% of you weren't here for that. So I wanted to reintroduce this year and talk about reach, care, and grow. Today, we're going to dive into the idea of caring. We're going to dive into the idea of caring, which is significant, or DNA. Oh, sorry, it's care. I texted him the wrong title. Because what we need to do is care for people. But caring is very complicated. And I think we need to dive into it. So let me read this text. It's found in the book of Mark, the 5th chapter, verses 21. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by the name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come, lay your hands on her so that she may be well and live. And he went with them, and a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, who had suffered much on the many physicians, had spent all she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched him in his garment. And for she said, if I touch even the hem of his garment, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus perceived himself that power had gone out of him. Power had gone out of him. Immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing around you, yet you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembled and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he followed, and he followed, and he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? This child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him. And he went in where the child was, taking her by the hand, and he said, "Teletia kamai," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk. She was 12 years of age. And they immediately became overcome with amazement. This pairing of stories is interesting, Jermaine. It is reported in all three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And what I find interesting is that you have two stories of healing, resurrection, and hope juxtaposed against each other. You have the story that most of us are very familiar with, which is the woman with the issue of blood. The issue of blood, the issue of blood. The other one is the issue of Jairus' daughter. They seem very different, but today I want to use them as object lessons about how do we reach people. It's quite simple. These two stories show us that we have to stop to help people and go to help people. We've got to stop and we've got to go. It seems like they would be fighting against each other. Like, it doesn't seem like it would make sense to me. If I'm telling you got to reach people and I tell you stop and go, most of you would look at me, because I would. Be like, can you clarify those instructions for me? I could already hear it. Some of you are really nice. Be like, "Pastor, you can't walk and stand still." You'd say it nicely to me. You would say, I can go there, but I don't. If I don't start because I'm stopping, how do I get there? But I think we as the church have oversimplified the conceptual framework of caring for people to be very black and white. Let me break it down to you. Some people will say the church's job is to care for those that are inside of the church, their community. They will say, these are the people that God sent. We should care for them. We should take care of them. And I agree with that. That is what Jairus was doing. He was caring for his daughter. He went to Jesus and he brought him back to the home. We should care for the people here. There would be others that say we need to do outreach to the entire world. There's so many different issues that the church has to and must tackle every single day. The world is broken and we are the light of the world and we ought to be out there and we ought to take care of everything. But I think Jesus shows us that we are not allowed to live in a world of polar opposites and black and white. It is not an either or conundrum. It is a requirement that we do both of them and do both of them well. I think we live in a culture that has made anytime you have a choice, it's never about compromise. It's about either or. If I do this for the people in the building, I can't do that for the people outside the building. If I do that for the people outside the building, I can't do this for the people inside the building. But it's a requirement for those of us in the church and for university to care. It is a requirement that we slow down and we care. So let me deal with stop first, and then I'll deal with go. Stop, go. So we don't have to break any place. I'm joking. All right. Here is the interesting thing. Jesus gets off the boat, and he is approached by Jairus. Jairus is the leader of the synagogue. He is the one that would read the scripture. He's the one that does the verses. He's the one that does all of that. He is the leader of the synagogue. And this important man comes to him and says, I have faith to come. Jesus, I need you to come heal my daughter. Jesus says, you know, you asked me the right way. You're not like the others in the synagogue. You're not trying to trap me. You're doing this out of faith. Let's go get your daughter. Let's go heal your daughter. And on the way there, the crowd is thronging around him. The people are all around him. He's walking through the crowd because there's an expectation that the miracle man, Jesus, is going to do something that is miraculous right here. And they're walking. And all of a sudden, Jesus stops and says, someone touched me. I felt the power flow out of me. Now, the disciples, rightly so, say to Jesus, what's the matter? What's the matter? How are you stop? Why would you stop? Why would you stop? How do you know somebody's touching you? Because you are in a crowd. People are hustling and bustling. There's so many people around you. And how can you stop? But he said, power left me. And out comes this woman. Out comes this woman. And says, I touched the hem of your garment. The author gives us background and says, you know, the reality in this text is that she had been suffering for years. And check out how she was suffering. Because oftentimes when we as a church start reaching out to people, we start saying, let's reach out to those that are less than, those that are this, those are that. They said she had resources to see multiple physicians over multiple years. But she was still broken. That'll preach in Palo Alto. Let me try it again. She had all the money to see the doctors. She saw all the best doctors of her time. She had all the resources, and if you know, medical costs are some of the most expensive costs that you can have. You can spend millions of dollars in a lifetime dealing with chronic situations, and she had the money to do that, and yet she was still. Because, you know, I need to dispel the stop. When I say stop, it's not stop because you saw somebody on the side of the highway. It's stop because you saw somebody in the break room. Too often, when we start talking about caring, we say, let's go to East Palo Alto. Or let's go to Oakland. Like we don't have the highest suicide rate in the city of Palo Alto. But what Jesus does is he ignores the crowd. He ignores the onlooker. And he looks her dead in the eye. And he says, your faith has healed you. When you start caring for people with private concerns, they'll have a public testimony. There's so many of us that are walking around right now, and we're waiting for the next cause and the next person or the next thing that's an issue. And we're looking at the crowd around us, and there's somebody in that crowd that we have sensed that they're suffering and they're broken and they're hurt. And all that God is asking of you is to stop for that person, because oftentimes we're looking so far off into the sunset, so far off into yonder, that we miss that there are people that are right in our own household, right in our own crowd, right in our own community that are suffering. So when we're walking and you're trying to walk to the next protest and the next march and the next thing, God's telling you, stop, turn around, look, there's somebody right by you. They're suffering. So many of us are rushing to help the causes. And they're important. I'm not picking on the causes. I'm just using it as a comparison. That we miss the people around us that need us to care for them. Somebody said to me the other day, they asked me a question, they asked me a question, they said, how do we change the reputation of Christianity in America? And I said to him, I was like, that's hard, because we've been dragged through the media. But it changes by us caring for people with Christian love, one person at a time. Our faith is transmitted through the interchange of people. Sometimes the greatest example of God that somebody will have in their life is the one that stopped to talk to them, is the one that stopped to help them, is the one that stopped to work with them. And you don't believe me? If you just go back to the parable of the Good Samaritan, you had the priest and the elders that walked by the man that was beat on the road, but the one that was blessing to the man that got beat, and the one that was the one that did the will of God was not the religious, it was not the important, it was just the one that stopped. So I just need to encourage somebody right now, because it's tingling in your spirit. You know, you see the face of that person in your mind, you see the face of that situation in your mind, and God is moving in your spirit right now and telling you that you need to stop, talk, reach out to that person today. I need somebody to help me out and reach out to somebody in your life today, because you know that no matter what they're struggling with, whatever the challenges, there is healing in their life once they lean on Jesus. And you're about to introduce them to a God that can save them, a God that can help them, a God that can break yokes, a God that can shift situations. And all you got to do is stop. 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 Next thing God is telling you is to go. Stop. Go. As the story continues, Jesus has this interchange with this woman. And he continues to walk to Jairus' house, and he gets there, and if you understand ancient Middle Eastern culture, there is an entire cultural motif around mourning. So people had a form and a format and tradition around mourning. So you had people that would professionally mourn. They would show up to the house. They would wail outside. It was a whole thing. I mean, anytime, one of the significant challenges I've seen during the COVID season is that our norms around funeralizing people have changed. Every culture has a tradition around when somebody dies, how they manage it. And this is their thing. The people are there. They're ready. They got on their wailing clothes. They got on their best black dress with their little hat and the thing that come over this eye, and they were outside and they're crying, and the pallbearers have on the white gloves, and Jesus shows up. Jesus shows up. And they laugh at Jesus. My question to you is, how many times do we bring Jesus to somebody and the people around them laugh? And how many of us get discouraged because they laughed? Not the person that needed, but the person around them. Oh, that church stuff. They don't need the church. They don't need God. We'll just get them to this and that, and they'll take care of it all. And we walk away with our head down, acting like we are powerless, instead of bringing the good news to dead places. So Jesus walks in, and he utters the words, and he raises the daughter. So he goes. We are required to walk into dead situations. And this is interpersonal, so take a look at this. Remember, I said a private struggle became public for victory. A public issue became private for healing. Let me say that again. The woman with the issue of blood had a private issue, and she got healed and became a public blessing. Jairus' daughter was sick and died. It was a public issue, but it was a private healing. Jesus leaves the crowd behind and walks in by himself to do the healing. Too many of us, when we are going to people with an issue, got to tell the whole crowd to come along with us. I got to go talk to my cousin about his issue. What issue? Well, you see, what had happened was God is calling us to go without the crowd. God is calling us to walk without the people. But God is calling us to step into dead places. Now, let me tell you what that requires. The first person healed because of faith, but it requires faith to step into dead places. Because there are situations that there are people in our lives that are battling that no banker, doctor, addiction counselor, marriage counselor, job, anything can do. And you know it's a dead situation. And the only thing that can fix and heal that situation is not because you're so smart, not because you have enough money, not because you have it all together. The only thing that can fix it is the power of Jesus. And so many of us are walking in with bank books and pop psychology when we're dealing with people with issues instead of walking in with the power of Jesus to speak to them. There's something about when you walk into dead places with Jesus. He's got a track record of raising dead things. I used to have an issue, Jad. I used to have an issue. When I first became a pastor, I used to have really bad anxiety when I talk with people and they were dealing with big life situations. Because I would be like, I got to say the right thing. They're counting on me to say the right thing. I got to have the right answer. These are people that are older than me, people that are younger than me, people going through situations that I didn't even know existed. I had to come up with the answer. I had to get it right. I had to figure it out. I had to do research. I had to do this. I had to do that. And it would drive me crazy. Then I get in the car and be like, did I give the right answer? Did I say the right thing? Did I do the right thing? But then one day God spoke to me. He says, you ain't got nothing to do with this. You might be smart. You might got it all together. You might do it. But you have nothing to do with this. This is all about my power. This is all about my might. This is all about what I bring into the situation. And I started leaning on Jesus. And I would go in and I'll pray hard before, pray hard with them, give them what God gave them my heart. And people would come back months later and be like, you know what, God moved in my life. And I would get happy. Not because I gave the right advice, I ain't have nothing to do with it. I'd get happy because God put the words in my mouth, and these people are seeing real healing and breakthrough. And oftentimes you wonder when you got to go into dark places and you got to go into dark situations and you got to go talk about difficult things and you got to go speak to difficult people and you got to deal with things that are impossible. I'm telling you, you don't go by yourself, because if you go by yourself, you will be overwhelmed. But right now, all I need you to do is walk with him and talk with him and move with him and go with Jesus. So when you step into the valley of the dark places, all you know is that you're covered, and the person you're speaking to will heal, and he'll raise him like he raised Lazarus, and he'll raise him like he raised Jairus' daughter, and he'll raise him like he raised himself on the third day. Now watch this, watch this, watch this, watch this. I ran into an issue, Sister Beatty. I ran into an issue. I said to God, because I read the text, I said, you put these two stories together. Is the stop more important? Or is the goal more important? And he said, they're both the same. What do you mean? He said, read the text. The issue started at the same time. The woman with the issue of blood was dealing with it 12 years. Jairus' daughter was 12 years old. There is no issue that stop or go, that where it started at the same time. But you know what happened when they went 12 years later? It was the same solution. By faith and by the power of God, 12 years later, a little girl was healed. Even though she might have had a good life and the situation might have just been triage for a situation that just happened then. Or it could have been like the woman with the issue of blood that had struggled for all of 12 years. It doesn't matter how they get there, but when they get to the answer, and when they get to Jesus, he will heal them. So I need your university today to pick up and go and stop and go, because if you care for the community and you care for people and you care about their lives, you don't have the strength, you don't have the answer, you don't have it all. But when you lean on Jesus, when you lean on Jesus, when you lean on Jesus, he will guide your steps, he will lead your path. He will be the one that moves for you. So right now, I just need you to care for somebody. Care. 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 Can we please rise?